I had no idea, absolutely no idea. I didn't even have a hint, and would have continued to live in ignorance if it weren't for that damned leaking factory roof. I loved that damn woman, my wife Pat, and would give my life for her without a moment's hesitation if I had to. And for our life together to end in such a banal way, my heart almost burst with grief. Oh yes, by the way, I'm Nigel Billings, just an ordinary guy, average height, average build, completely unremarkable in every way. I'm not doing anything smart, I'm just a cog in the system. Worked at the printing plant all week on the night shift from 15 to midnight, Tuesday to Friday. An ordinary life for an ordinary guy. I had no idea that my whole life was a lie and that it would collapse so quickly around my extraordinary ears. But just like that, what do we know about what's going on around us until it hits us between the eyes? So this is who I am, homme ordinaire. What about my wife, Pat? She is much better than just above average, my wife of 25 years. In fact, she is a living dream, always has been and remains. Don't ask me how I even won it, because I have absolutely no idea, right? She is tall, 175 cm, already a centimeter taller than me, and when she puts on chic heels, she towers over me. But I dealt with this complex while we were dating. It was never a problem as long as she was with me. I was proud to show her off. Blue-eyed and blonde, beautiful, that much is clear, although at 45 her blonde hair now requires a fortnight's help from a colorist at Marlene's salon in the village. To some, her slender figure may not be full enough in the chest, but for a die-hard ass and legs fan like me, her firm butt and long, slender legs are a dream come true. As for her small breasts, she was able to nurse our 3 children without any complaints from them, and thanks to her regular gym sessions 3 times a week for 2 hours, they are still firm over a flat stomach and are the perfect handful for me. Why do you need more? As far as I knew at that moment, I was one of the lucky ones and should have appreciated my blessings. Oh, I thank my lucky stars every day until at night, because of the damn leaky roof, there weren't any stars visible in the factory, whether they were lucky or not. A year ago on this day, an event occurred that completely destroyed my life. I guess the consequences of that night have ruined a lot of people's lives, but I'm selfish enough to not care about anyone else. I know I suffered the most, and I don't care what it meant to anyone else. Okay, I recognize that others have suffered and continue to suffer consequences, and to be honest, most of the consequences are largely due to my actions at the time. But does this matter to me? Of course not. Why should I? They don't care about me. No, not one of them. Where to begin? Well, I guess I should start with the fire. Of course, it was the fault of old Jack Grafton, a stingy old man, and his inept son Jack Jr. Only made the original mistake worse. The roof of the 60-year-old building we worked in was always leaking, and every time it rained heavily, we had to set up to a dozen plastic trash cans to catch not only the drips, but in some places the constant flow of dirty, rusty rainwater. The owners of Grafton Graphics were greedy, and instead of replacing the entire roof, which was really necessary, they simply patched up the worst areas from time to time. This only moved the leaks further along the roof, creating a disadvantage in being able to predict where all the drips would end up each time, or what often turned out to be bubbling streams. The night of the fire was a wet, stormy autumn night with rain pouring down in buckets for about 45 minutes. At the far end of the building, where I worked alone in the plate department, I had only one leak, a spot on the wall indicating its usual path. I didn't need a trash can for this leak as the water just ran down the wall and formed a puddle on the floor. As usual, I just threw in a bunch of cleaning rags to soak up the water and prevent it from reaching the passage where it could cause a slip. I continued to work on the print plate set as this particular leak did not affect me. Then, about 25 minutes into the storm, the lights in the plate room flickered before the room went dark and all the machines stopped working. The green emergency output lights came on within seconds, but the main power backup generator never came online. Outside, the lampposts were still lit, so it was clear that the problem was isolated to our old building. I took my jacket and bag, which were lying next to the door, and left the room through the inner door and walked along a short corridor. When I walked through the doors of the factory, it became clear that we had serious problems. The place was filled with black smoke and fire hydrants were running. It was a complete disaster for any printing house. I retreated back into the plate room and exited through the nearest emergency exit at the back of the building. I headed to the evacuation point in front of the building as the downpour continued. Toby Mullins, assistant night manager, was in charge on this Friday night and marked me off his increasingly wet attendance list. Apparently, I was the last one because after that he announced that everything was in place. I liked Toby. He was young and ambitious, but fair and always grateful. Toby asked, rather than ordered, people to do things, and people usually responded positively. He knew how to do one thing for sure: make decisions. "Okay, we're all here. The fire department is on the way," he said. "Can we move these cars out of the front parking lot? Otherwise, they will be blocked." Several people groaned as they realized their keys were still inside, inaccessible from their lockers. I parked in the back near the exit of the parking lot, so I had no problems. Several of us, including me, jingled our keys cheerfully, to which those trapped with their keys and coats in the locker rooms just groaned. "The leak found its way into the electrical panel of the 5-color press," Toby continued, "and the explosion blew the door off. Sparks ignited a nearby trash can containing cleaning solvents, which then spread to the press. So we probably won't be able to work the rest of the night. Once firefighters have calmed the electrical problem, the night shift will have to clear out and assess the damage. All of today's printed work and all of the paper stock prepared for tomorrow's orders will have to be replaced. It is clear that printing will not resume until late Saturday morning, and perhaps not even until Monday." We heard the sirens of at least 2 fire trucks moving along the bypass road. As several guys who had car keys hurried to park their cars, Toby walked up to me. "Since this is an electrical problem, once the fire is contained, an electrical engineer will need to check the panel and possibly replace it. They have a response time of 2 hours before they even arrive, and you're finishing in less than 3 hours, so you better go home now." The plate department worked only in 2 shifts, unlike the rest, which worked in 3 shifts. If a plate failed on the press between midnight and 6 in the morning, the machinists had to make it themselves. I told Toby what he probably already knew, that the wafers were going through the processor that would now have to be removed and thrown away, and all the chemicals would probably have to be cleaned and replenished before we could start making wafers again. "This will kill half the next wafer fabrication shift." He said some rude words. We both knew that we would have to remake all the plates on the jammed presses, as well as print fresh plates for all the ruined printing jobs of the last few days, all of which were part of the accumulating costs of the late roof repairs. I hurried to move my car before the firefighters decided to approach the fire from both ends of the building and block my path to the exit. As I drove out of the industrial area, I glanced at the time. It was not yet 10:30 p.m., more than 3 hours early. With a little luck, Pat will still be awake and maybe in the mood. Okay, I'm an optimist by nature, so what's the problem? As it turns out, I was right on both counts, but I couldn't take advantage of either one. To set her up for a little unexpected love, I stopped at a 24-hour supermarket right off the bypass and bought a bottle of wine, some chocolate, and a bouquet of flowers, roses if I remember correctly. Hey, I can make an effort on the romantic side when needed. As I approached my crescent-shaped, quiet street with an exit at each end, I noticed a bright red Porsche loudly roar out of my yard in front of me and quickly disappear, moving away from me. I recognized the car immediately. It belonged to Reggie Nicholson, Pat's boss. He bought a nearly new sports car in March or April and invited everyone he knew to an off-season Sunday barbecue to show off his damn thing. I had a suspicion that tonight he was not only showing off his bells and whistles. Patricia Bellows was an office secretary at the plant where I was then working when I first met her, about 28 years ago. This was not the best start to our long relationship, as I initially walked into the office to complain to the payroll clerk about his messing up with my overtime the previous week. We got paid on Thursday night in those days, real thick envelopes with cash, folded bills, change, and payslip. Once we had the cash, the younger part of the workforce, myself included, would head to the nearest pub for a few beers and a game of darts, bar pool, shav hapney, or cribbage before comically staggering home on foot or by bike. It was my simple pleasure on Thursdays every week. Those were the times. I was 23 years old at the time and a master printer, having just completed an apprenticeship 2 years earlier and with 7 years of experience running single-color offset presses under my belt. Over my first logger and bidder, checking my payroll, I discovered that I had not been paid for Saturday morning's overtime, which at time and a half rate was 6 hours of work, which meant that my salary was 12% less, a significant amount that I had expected spend on wine, women, and songs on the weekend. Have I already told you that I am an optimist? Well, I've always been like this until I changed recently. The work week ran from Monday to Sunday, so any work done on Saturday was paid the following Thursday. So, when on Friday morning, around 9 o'clock, the late office workers seemed to have decided that it was finally time to start their last working day of the week, I burst into the payroll office and, slamming my paycheck on Polly Campbell's desk, said that I'm pissed off that I wasn't paid for 6 hours of work. Polly calmly said that she would look into it, check the appropriate time cards, and come see me in the printing room later. I turned sharply, preparing to leave as expected, and ran into a new girl whom I had never seen before. She was carrying 2 plastic cups of coffee, one apparently for Polly, and when she bumped into me, the coffee spilled all over her smart lemon yellow printed dress. Of course I was sorry. I apologized to her many times and offered to pay for the dry cleaning, but she was very nice and said she was sure it would wash out. She had a sweet smile, and I am an absolute fan of sweet smiles. Only later, when she returned to the coffee machine for more, did I have the opportunity to appreciate her more than decent legs and ass. So I followed up my apology by catching up with her at the coffee machine and inviting her to dinner. She was very young and modest and blushed like a lobster before refusing. Hell, she probably already had a boyfriend courting her. Lucky. You can't blame him. In fact, she was amazing. When Polly later found me, I was working on my single-color offset press, printing magazine covers one color at a time. She gave me a new salary envelope, a payslip, and the missing amount in cash. I asked Polly about the new girl. Well, I wouldn't be me if I didn't ask. Pollyanna was a very outgoing married lady with small children who had just started school, so Polly returned to work full-time. She was a very platinum blonde with a penchant for wearing short, tight skirts, and she quite made up for what the young lady I was interested in lacked in breast size. It was always a pleasure for the whole shop to lure Polly to a place where we could enjoy the view. I saw my dirty workmates gathering around to enjoy the view. Luckily, the noise in the press room was so loud that we had to put our heads so close together to talk that I almost choked on her perfume, and I thought the volatile solvents we used on the presses were already intoxicating enough. Polly smiled when she learned of my interest in the new girl and was ready to tell me everything she knew about her. I learned that her name is Pat. She is only 18. She has just finished secretarial courses. She is modest and single, and she does not seem to have had a permanent boyfriend. It was only her 5th day at the company, and she had not yet left the shared office. Polly thought I might have a good chance since Pat asked about me immediately after I left. I thanked her and asked if it was possible for Pat to come down to my car on some pretext. She laughed and said that the state of my timesheets was so bad that she could send Pat to me half a dozen times a day. Good old Polly. I still see her around town now. She likes to drink, but she has let herself go a little. She had an affair with a guy from the booklet shop a couple of years after I met Pat, which cost her her marriage, her house, and her children away. It's sad, in fact. I feel sorry for her, although we are now in the same boat. Sure enough, Pat was sent to find me later that day. Luckily, the press was stopped when she arrived as I was washing it, perhaps between colors or from a previous job. I asked her if she had time to tour the plant. She was here for her second interview, but it was Joan, the office manager, at the end of the day, and everyone who knew anything about working in the plant had already gone home. The working day at the plant ran from 8 to 16:30, and the office hours in those days were an hour later, from 9 to 17:30. So I showed Pat around the plant, knowing that I would have to endure a lot of ridicule from my mischievous companions later. When we reached the paper warehouse at the end of the plant, where it was relatively quiet, well, as quiet as a printing plant can be, I again asked the crucial question, could I take her to dinner? She blushed cutely, I thought, saying that she would think about it. I was about to beg her just before we reached the large rubber doors leading to the bookbinding department, when she suddenly said yes. We stopped, and I pulled a piece of pencil from my oily overalls and tore off a piece of wrapping paper to write down her phone number and address. We agreed to meet that evening at 7, and she left on her wobbly heels, leaving behind the most pleasant sight of a leaving girl that I had seen in a month of Sundays. I had to stop by the master's office to call the restaurant and make a reservation, crossing my fingers in hopes that they would have a table available for two. And it was. I checked my finances. I used to put a few coins into my savings account on Saturday each week. This dinner will probably cost me more than I planned to spend the entire week. I had to borrow money from my old mother from the money I left on the shelf after returning from the pub on Thursday night. I needed this money until I could go into town on Saturday morning after working overtime and withdraw enough to give to her. Mother could tell I was impressed with this girl. I took a bath on Saturday, Friday night, and put on my best suit, or rather my only suit. I didn't even think about what I would do on a second date, or even if there would be one. I went all in on that first night. I checked where she lived on the way home from the factory in my old beat-up Vauxhall, so I could easily find the place again in the dark. There was no sat-nav in those days. How did we even manage? We come from different walks of life, me and Pat. I was a factory floor worker. She worked in an office. Her parents were middle class and owned a candy store on Main Street, while my father worked in a factory making parts for washing machines. I lived with my parents in a rented house in the middle of a row of cramped houses on a council housing estate. Pat's parents' house was much more upscale. It was their own half-house with a garage and room on the side to expand if they wanted. In their backyard, as I found out later, there was a gazebo and a laundromat with lawns and flower beds. Our backyard was concreted, and we had my father's dovecote in the barn at the back. In front of the house, there was a village green with its own pond with ducks. The only grass on our way was coming through cracks in the sidewalk. I was supposed to pick Pet up at 7. Of course, she wasn't ready, so I was ushered through a spacious square hallway into the living room, where I had to wait 10 minutes on a chintz sofa, having fun with her little sister Evelyn. Evie could make any man squirm, she still can. She was only 12 at the time, and she kept asking me awkward questions like if I had kissed Patricia, where we were going, what we should eat, when we would be back, and when I would take her with me again. Oh, did I know I had protruding ears? Yes, I knew. She asked all these questions with an all-encompassing seriousness that continues to this day. I felt like I had heard enough when where why to last me until the end of the world. Evie and I danced around each other, teasing and flirting, without any serious intentions anyway, for 30 years. I found her tiresome most of the time, but we always seemed to get along. Pat once thought that Evie had a crush on me when she was a child, but I never noticed. When Pat walked into that cozy living room, the walls seemed to melt, and we were left alone in the middle of the ballroom, and for a moment I felt like I could dance from here to the moon. And I couldn't dance to butterscotch. I was the same wallflower that raised me with ivy. But I flew out of that stately semi-detached house with lovely Pat on my arm as if I had wings. Until I got to my rusty pile of cars. I kept forgetting that the passenger door in the old car stuck like a bitch. I have never used this door myself. My passengers only used this door on Saturday afternoons and Sunday mornings, when I took a few stocky buddies with me to watch the match in the afternoon and play Sunday football in the morning. Damn, I pulled and pulled at that stubborn son of a bitch door and cursed. And then I walked around to the driver's side and used all the strength of my size 10 on it to open that son of a bitch from the inside. All my football teammates are strong people, so I usually don't have to open the door for them. There was probably an opening technique that my comrades had learned out of necessity, but I hadn't bothered to master it. My mom wasn't seen dead in my car pile, so it wasn't an issue up until this point. I apologized to Pay for the pile of cars and the uncontrollable outburst of profanity. Pat, God bless her cotton trousers, just smiled sweetly. The Clipper was a posh restaurant on London Road that used to be close to the bypass. It's long gone, replaced by an ugly, modern, boxy steel and glass motel that's usually overcrowded thanks to the power of national advertising. Although it was still a restaurant, it had changed hands several times since it began life as an inn a century and a half ago. At the time I wrote this up, the restaurant had recently been renamed and was serving a mostly anglicized French menu. We were escorted to our table by a snooty penguin who realized that my ill-fitting suit had been bought at Burton's penultimate January sales and Pat's heavenly chiffon creation had been bought this season from a high-street boutique in a smart city many miles from these dead industrial cities. He seated Pat with a flourish at our slightly less than intimate table for two in the middle of the restaurant, giving her an ingratiatingly soft smile. Then he pulled out a chair so I could get in, and I swear he pushed that chair at my feet so I plopped down in my seat like a rag doll. If I had false teeth, they would grind. What could I say? I had an important date with a very cool bird, and I needed to be on my best behavior. If this was the pig and the whistle, I would have crushed that fat bastard. To be honest, I was more than a little scared by the environment. This may have only been the first time I felt out of place in the company of Patricia Bellows, and it wasn't going to be the last, but I didn't realize it at the time. The waiter for our table was called by a penguin, and he brought the menu, handing it to the lady first, of course. Then another damn waiter brought out the wine list and handed it to me. The first waiter lit a candle in the middle of the table and stood back so we could make our choice. However, the wine waiter continued to hover at my shoulder. I resisted ordering a pint, especially after seeing that a half pint was 1.5 times the price of a full pint at my local pub. Pat was still studying the menu when I politely asked her if a pitcher of house wine would suit her, to which she looked up, smiled, and said yes. Then, after further clarification, she chose white so I could get rid of the wine waiter. No wonder they charge so much for everything in places like this. They are clearly overstaffed. I don't remember what we ordered back then, all those years ago, but I'm guessing Pat opted for fried chicken with a heap of creamy, herbed French sauce, and I probably opted for the crispy, well-done steak just as nature intended, except with a dash of Coleman's on the side. Thank you. However, what I do remember is that while holding the menu, I accidentally brought the top of it to the candle flame. I didn't notice this because I was studying the tiny font at the bottom, trying to find the fries and beans in my order, probably until the menu lit up. Pat was the first to scream. I think she said, "Fire," although she could have sworn something quite obscene. Her school of etiquette sought to educate girls so that they would go out into the world with a varied vocabulary. I definitely cursed. These laminated plastics light up like Roman candles. Then I dropped the damn menu like a hot potato that knocked over a candle and lit a lace napkin on the tablecloth. At that moment, a wine waiter walked over with our jug of wine. I grabbed it and poured half of it into the fire. What a scandal this caused. The first penguin, who already had a low opinion of my taste in dark blue wool, while openly admiring my companion's cleavage, looked down on me as if I was dragging him along with the dirt from the street while he cleared the trash from the table. He returned with new linen, cutlery, glasses, and new menus. However, he did not bring a new candle. I was too embarrassed to add any edge, which was a first for me. I already told you I felt embarrassed. Most of the people around seemed to think the incident was funny, and a couple of the guys were sympathetic enough to tell me how close they were to doing exactly the same thing, which helped a bit. Meanwhile, Pat found the whole thing incredibly funny, and it definitely eased the tension between us. She tried not to laugh too loudly and didn't do a very good job of it. She looked adorable when she laughed. I just hoped that I would have a few more opportunities to make her laugh in my company, only this time on purpose. Dinner went well. In fact, we both enjoyed ourselves, and after that I took her to a pub with a nice lounge bar for another drink. It was too crowded with the Friday crowd to be comfortable, although we were able to squeeze onto a bench in the corner where I hugged her, more for protection than anything else. By then, she seemed to have lost the modesty she had shown with me earlier that day, and every time someone lit a cigarette with a lighter or matches, she would start giggling. I didn't mind. The crowded bar meant we were pressed tightly together, and a lot of laughing meant she was pressed even more against me, so I wasn't complaining. When we left the pub, we walked arm in arm back to the car, which I had left in the free car park near the end of New Street. It was a little out of the way, so it was unusually quiet and quite dark. I opened her door with a sharp jerk and let her inside. Then I sat down on my side, and as soon as I sat down, Pat literally attacked me. She wrapped her arms around my neck and the back of my head. Her lips pressed tightly against me, and her tongue tried to scrape the enamel from my back teeth. When she paused for a moment to catch her breath, I said breathlessly, "Save something for the honeymoon, Pat." This stopped her for a moment. A couple of seconds passed before she said quietly, hesitantly, "You're very confident, aren't you, Nigel?" "Everything other than being sure where we'll end up, Pat, but I want to be there for the long haul, not just a quick hello and goodbye." "What makes you think you'll be so lucky?" "Well, we seem to be getting along pretty well, but I kind of expected that over the next few weeks, it would be you who would be pushing me away. I was going to move very slowly, so I found myself in unfamiliar territory." "So you want us to go slow?" "Well, at least get to know each other better, before that." "Oh, I'm not a virgin, if that's what you're worried about." "Neither am I." I looked at her lovely face illuminated by the moonlight in this dark place. "But I would still like to know you more and spend a lot of time with you. Does it suit you?" "Okay, Nige, that suits me." She still held me by the neck, and now slowly brought her lips to mine, and we kissed relatively discreetly for quite a long time, while she stroked the back of my head and I stroked her lower back and outer thigh. When she had enough kisses, she relaxed, buried her face in my chest and sighed. We sat there for several minutes without saying anything. I continued to stroke her back and thigh. She lowered her hands to my shoulders. Then Pat sighed again and moved. "Tomorrow?" she asked. "What about tomorrow? What do you have planned?" "I usually have a pretty busy day on Saturdays." "What were you planning to do before you met me today?" "Work in the morning from 8 to 12, home for lunch and change for football in the afternoon, back home around 6, and then to the football social club for the evening. They usually have entertainment like a comedian and band on a Saturday night. Would you like to join?" "I usually don't get up until 12 on Saturday, then I need to wash my hair. What time will you pick me up for the evening?" "Let's do it around 7:30. "Fits me, Nige. I think you better take me home now. My mom is probably waiting for me." "Fine." We exchanged another quiet kiss, pinching each other happily, before we broke it off, and I wound up the old wreck. I had to wipe off all the condensation from inside the windows before I could see where to go, and I drove her home. I got out of the car and forcefully opened the door, helping her out of the car. When we arrived at the house, the porch light was already on, so we stopped and quickly kissed, and I delicately touched her beautiful ass again. Pat didn't mind. She was not the modest girl I took her for in the morning. "See you tomorrow, Nige." "See you tomorrow, Pat." I spent my Saturday morning tea break in the car park with old Jerry, the plumber. Together, we removed the door latches, lubricated them, made a few adjustments, and the door worked as it should. I made sure to spray everything down with degreaser afterwards so Pat wouldn't stain her dress. This Jerry is old school. He loves lube. He slathers it on like a clown applies makeup. Well, I couldn't afford many of these dates with Pat without spending heavily on my savings. So it was a relatively inexpensive Saturday night at a rather rough football social club. I'm guessing Pat went there because it was something new for her. She was used to the conservative club and the posh nightclubs in the city. We pretended not to notice each other at work on Monday. On Monday evening, she usually left the office with the girls. On Tuesday, we went to a movie together at the new multiplex and split the cost equally, holding hands and sharing a bag of caramel popcorn. Pat received her paycheck backdated once a month, and the next paycheck was still 3 weeks away, so she also used her savings. On Wednesday, I went to football practice, and on Thursday, it was pay night and my night with the boys. Then there were Friday and Saturday nights, which were our main nights out. We would go out to eat, dance, or go to the theater. We continued to meet regularly, and our relationship developed day by day. I managed to hold out for almost 3 weeks before she pounced on me again, and this time we made love for the first time in the back seat of my car. She was like a tigress and was furiously chasing me. I tried to keep both of us on the ground and not use her, but in the end she used me. I honestly felt that now that she had me, she would disappear, but to my surprise, this did not happen, and we continued to strengthen our relationship. We were from different worlds, middle class and working class. Class differences were much clearer almost 30 years ago. I stayed on the production floor my entire working life. I liked it. Eventually, when the opportunity arose, I moved to work in the wafer fabrication department, which gave me a significant increase in salary. Therefore, I actually earned good money as a worker and was highly respected among my colleagues, although I say so myself. On the other hand, Pat received an excellent basic education at secretarial school and college and was ambitious in business. So she kept taking management courses and moved on to better and better jobs before we had children, which we had for 6 years in her early to mid-20s. Because I worked shifts and with the support of our mothers, Pat was able to work full-time, taking only minimal leave to care for each child. So her career continued to flourish. She joined the Spinner Group about 6 years ago, and she and her boss, Reggie Nicholson, became a great team and were promoted several times until Nicholson became sales director and Pat became the senior of 3 sales managers. Pat was also the life of the party. She liked dancing and dinners, she sometimes drank too much, she liked to meet a lot of different people, and she had a lot of friends who I thought were rather superficial. Her best friends were a very boisterous bunch and often got into trouble. Most of her friends and her sister Evie faced marital problems, divorces, and affairs. Her sales jobs included many dinners, wine parties, clients or attendance at concerts, ballet, and sporting events. This meant that I had to trust her to behave herself when she was without me, and I never had any reason to suspect her of anything. She made it a rule never to drink when she wasn't with me, so she was always in control. I always trusted her, just as she trusted me. I was a much quieter person than Pat, I wasn't a good dancer, and I didn't like clubs in general. I especially hated dinner parties, mainly because the people who went to them tended to look down on me because I worked in a factory. I liked beer more than wine and rarely drank until I passed out. I didn't have many friends, but they were friends for life. I didn't make many new friends over the years. How we were even able to meet and get married 2 years into our relationship has always seemed amazing to me. The fact that we were still together after 28 years of marriage constantly surprised me. I constantly reminded myself that I was in a place I wasn't supposed to be, and I was grateful for that the entire time it lasted. This led us to a night with a leaking roof at the factory, and I arrived home to see a possible rival for my wife's affections driving away from my house and disappearing around the corner. I parked my car in the short driveway with room for only 2 cars and pulled up behind Pat's car, a brand new black BMW sedan owned by the company. It was a completely new model, full of the latest automotive gadgets, a reflection of its undeniable value to the company. I turned off the engine and headlights and sat there for a minute or two, trying to collect my thoughts before entering. I had a half-serious intention of following Nicholson, but perhaps he had some innocent reason for being there, perhaps just dropping Pat off after a meeting with clients. The hood of Pat's car was cold, the rain had eased, but the car hadn't moved for at least a couple of hours. I took the chocolate, wine, and flowers into the house, quietly opening the front door. The ground floor was dark and the rooms were empty. I left my shoes at the entrance. Pat would never allow street shoes to be worn around the house. She had cream carpets, and I always got nuts for drops of coffee or for bringing in rubbish from the garden. I tiptoed into the kitchen and left the 3 items I'd bought there for safekeeping before sneaking upstairs. The lights in the master bedroom were on, and I could hear the shower running. The bed was in disarray, the blanket was on the floor at the foot of the bed, pillows were scattered everywhere. Her dress, blouse, tights, and underwear were scattered across the bedroom floor. I examined the bottom sheet and a couple of pillows. The room smelled of fresh sex, so it seemed that my loving wife had enjoyed at least a couple of hours of extramarital love in our bed. Pat was unaware of my presence, her joyful post-sex singing barely audible over the sound of the running water in the shower. The layout of the bathroom was such that there was not enough space for a bathtub. There was only a shower, wash basin, and toilet. In addition, the bathroom door could not be opened inward, so it opened outward into the bedroom. As quietly as possible, I moved the bed so that it blocked the shower door from opening. This meant I couldn't close the bedroom door, so I left it open, wedging the bed at an angle so the bathroom door was securely closed. I then removed all the bedding, including the pillowcases, and put them in several black trash bags from the cupboard under the kitchen sink. I took them to the car and locked them in the trunk as evidence, I thought, for a divorce. Luckily, I thought, we didn't have any of the kids at home. Charlie and June were at university. Charlie was in his second year of his undergraduate degree in Newcastle, and June was starting her master's in Manchester. Robert moved out 3 years ago and lived with his girlfriend across town. With me out of the house until literally 1 in the morning, Pat had the freedom to do whatever she wanted in the evening. How long she had been doing what she had obviously just done, I had no idea. I searched the garage and collected a few things that I thought I would need and put them in the trunk of the car. For a moment, I was tempted to set the house on fire, especially knowing that 2 fire engines were probably still occupied across town at the factory. Another thought that came to my mind was to drag Pat out of the shower, wet and naked, and dump her on the front lawn. I didn't like what would happen to the children in any of these cases. I knew where Nicholson lived. We visited him in April of this year. I didn't know if he parked his beautiful car outside the house, in the driveway, or in the garage. I drove past his house, and there she was, in the driveway. I parked around the next corner about 50 meters away and opened the trunk, taking out half a liter of white alcohol and about half a liter of methyl alcohol, as well as a box of matches that I had stored in the garage for a barbecue. It was about 10:15, and most of the houses on the street had lights on in their bedrooms and also downstairs. I consoled myself with the thought that at least I wouldn't wake up too many adults, and it wasn't a school day for the kids. The sports car was parked on a slight slope, and another car, probably his wife's, was parked in front. I poured methyl alcohol on each of the Porsche tires and then white alcohol on the roof and sides of the car. I lit 2 matches and threw one at the driver's side front wheel and the other at the rear wheel. The flames ignited immediately, licking the tires and paint and rising up the car towards the roof. By the time I walked around to the other side and threw the next 2 matches, the car was already well engulfed in flames. I calmly walked back to my car, started it, and drove home. On the way back, I called Toby on his cell phone and told him I needed a favor. Okay, he said warily. What? I asked him if the fire department was there. No, we just left. There was another emergency. I told him about my wife and Nicholson's car. I didn't even ask. He just said I was there all night and ordered me to come back as soon as possible to prove it. I left the bottles, still with some liquid in each, back in the garage and pulled out an old 3-liter can of used motor oil that I was going to recycle. Then I entered the house. I could hear loud bangs and hysterical muffled cries of, "Let me go," from the shower room as he walked up the stairs, stepping in his street shoes on its perfectly clean cream carpets. I grabbed the roll of trash bags that was still sitting there and started pulling all of her things out of her drawers and closets, stuffing the clothes as wrinkled as possible into the bags, starting with all of her fancy branded items that she wore for her dear friend Nicholson at work. I hauled the first 3 or 4 bags into the garage, poured a good dose of thick black oil into each bag, and tied them up. I spilled some oil on the garage floor, thinking what a bungler I was. I had old dirty rubber boots for gardening. I put them on, stepped in the oil, and followed the oily, muddy footprints all the way through the hallway, stairs, landing, and master bedroom. I lost count of the number of bags of clothes, but there were a lot of them, at least 20. I was wondering what to do with the bed. I could never sleep on it or use any of that sleeping furniture again. I had already decided that I couldn't use Toby's alibi since I was the only one who could come home and take Pat's things out to the garage. Crap. The imprints of the size 10 rubber boots were pretty damn obvious. I decided that at most I would spend 6 months in jail for setting fire to Nicholson's car and decided that every day was worth it. I might even get a suspended sentence if any of the 3 magistrates had previously divorced a cheating spouse. So, with the last bag tied, I took my 14-pound sledgehammer from its hook on the wall and lifted it into the bedroom. I smashed each nightstand with a couple satisfying blows of the hammer. The shower room fell silent for a while. I didn't notice this until I started using the hammer, but when I started, the screams of death began with renewed vigor. For a moment, I wished I had an axe instead of a sledgehammer so I could pry open one of the shower door panels and perform the "Here I am, Johnny" scene from the movie The Shining and really scared Pat one last time. You can never really plan these things properly without advance notice, can you? I trashed her dressing table and all the closet doors, and I smashed her favorite full-length mirror to pieces. I thought that given that I had just learned that I had 28 years of failure, another 7 years would be just a walk in the park. Then I started destroying the bed. Everything went quiet in the shower room as I moved the destruction closer to that door. I assumed that she had either passed out from horror or had cut her wrists. By that point, I didn't care what happened to her. I dragged the mattress down the oily steps onto the front lawn and dumped it there. I opened the garage and took out the last jar of oil and poured it onto the mattress. As I put the canister away on the shelf, with my back to the open garage door, fear struck me. Behind me, in close proximity, Pat shouted angrily, "Bloody hell! What's going on here, Nige?" This brings us quite nicely to the current moment. I left Part without saying a word. I didn't trust myself to remain polite. I left that night, still wearing my rubber boots, still wearing the same oily work pants I was standing in. I never heard from Nicholson, so there was no trial for arson. I eventually received court papers for a legal separation from Pat, with all of our assets frozen until both of our girls had completed their full education. I was instructed to continue to contribute the agreed-upon amount to the joint account to maintain the house and pay off the mortgage. I didn't like it because I had little money left to live on. I cut my expenses by giving up my cell phone and car. I'm tired of all the messages from Pat probably saying that her hookup didn't mean anything or something like that. I didn't listen to any of them, but I could guess what kind of nonsense there could be. I bought a second-hand bicycle to commute to work and rented a one-room studio above a busy shopping street, simply because it was cheap. I had to change jobs. Grafton Graphics went bankrupt as the company seemed to have no insurance, and I was laid off along with everyone else. Finally, after 3 months of trying, I got a job at a small copy shop on the main street, taking orders, designing small print jobs, making paper plates, and printing on small offset presses, or even copying documents. It wasn't much, but it was work. The children took their mother's side, naturally, when I called them the next day individually, and they all said that they wanted nothing to do with me. They all agreed that I should be locked up after what I did. Not a word about what she did to me. I may have scared her, but she destroyed me. Oddly enough, the only family member I've kept in touch with over the past year has been Pat's sister, Evie. She walked into the copy center one lunchtime about 2 weeks ago, and suddenly we found ourselves face to face, not knowing what to say. She came back a couple more times, and each time she told me that Pat wanted to talk to me. I told her until my face turned blue that I didn't want to talk to that lying cheater or any of her selfish children. As I pointed out to her, it was Pat who insisted on the legal separation, not me. Evie said it was a mistake. They thought they would lure me out of hiding to appear in court, but I never showed up to challenge the court's decision. Then Evie came by to remind me that it was the first anniversary of what we both humorously called the shower incident. Evie wanted to take me out to a restaurant to celebrate or perhaps commiserate. I tried to tell her no, I really didn't want anything to do with that family anymore, but she didn't listen. She insisted, and I admitted to her that I simply could not afford to go out in public, since alimony was squeezing every last drop out of me. Okay, I still had money from the severance package, about 8,000, but it was frozen in an ISA, strictly for emergencies. Evie insisted on paying for dinner, so I agreed to go with her as long as we went somewhere inexpensive. When she asked why, I admitted that I left that night only in work clothes, and I didn't have a suit or even anything decent to go out with. What I could wear I picked up at second-hand stores. She looked at me with such pity and squeezed my hand that I became even more determined to set her up. At the last minute, however, I remembered Pat once saying that Evie had a crush on me when she was younger, so what did I have to lose? My pride is long gone, and I have nothing left. I agreed to meet Evie at a restaurant for two reasons. First, I didn't want her to know where I lived in case she told my family, and second, I could always leave and ride my bike without being left stranded. I suspected it was a trap for Pat's ambush. I don't know why I thought this would happen. Pat and I were legally divorced, and she could initiate a divorce at any time, and I expected her to do so as soon as the girls graduated from university. I was just suspicious of Evie's motives because one woman had already disappointed me, and that made me suspicious of everyone. Listen, as I explained earlier, I'm not young anymore. I'm nobody that anyone would pay second attention to. I don't have a girlfriend, haven't for a long time, and frankly, I don't need anything from all these people. So why is Evie so interested in bringing me into the world? Even though she had a teenage crush on me almost 30 years ago, she is 11 years younger than me and a gorgeous 40-year-old. I'm a frustrated 50-year-old single man with funny protruding ears who settles into the role of a depressed and lonely old man who doesn't care about the rest of the world. I parked the bike and locked it against a pole at the edge of the parking lot next to the gloomy restaurant wall and pulled my pant legs out of my socks. I took the helmet under my arm and entered the restaurant. I arrived unfashionably early, 10 minutes before my appointed time. Looking around the tables casually, I didn't expect to see her anymore, but she was there, at a secluded table for two. Perhaps this meant Pat wouldn't ambush him at all. Evie looked very attractive, but that didn't change the fact that this was a relationship that was going nowhere. I looked like something the cat brought in, and I really didn't want someone sitting across from me who would constantly remind me of her sister, my ex. As I approached the table, Evie saw me and stood up to kiss me on the cheek. I hid my helmet under the table. She looked at this gesture and asked, "Without a car today?" Without a car at all, I had to give it up. Every penny goes towards supporting your bitch sister, her lover, and her daughters in the style they are used to, I said bitterly. Oh, I didn't know you were so bad. Yeah, I lost my job when the plant didn't resume work after the fire. This meant that I was out of work for 3 months, and as soon as I got another job that paid about half as much as before, your sister put restraining orders on me, freezing my assets from the time we were married and demanding blood made of stone. I took my helmet from under the table and stood up. Listen, I'm too angry and can't eat. It was a mistake that I came here. I have to go. Evie stood up and grabbed my hand. Please don't go, Nigel. I really need to talk to you. And look at you. I've never seen you so thin and exhausted. You need some food. Stay, she begged. Evie was like the little girl she was when she was 12 years old. If I had stayed, I would probably have been faced with a ton of questions starting with double V. Okay, I said. I am easily persuaded. Perhaps I'm just tired of the beans on toast diet in my flat. No wonder I have few friends. Evie ordered me a glass of beer and some kind of cocktail for herself. She already had one. She ordered the mixed grill, and I chose a large, juicy seared steak, chips, and mushrooms. I still wasn't sure I was hungry, but I figured I could afford it, Evie could pay, and I couldn't pass up the opportunity. While we were waiting for food, something strange happened. A woman approached the table, quite attractive, elegantly dressed, to be honest, even too elegant for this establishment, perhaps even a little provocatively. She was, I would say, between 35 and 40, with shoulder-length dark hair. She stopped at the table and stood next to me. "Sorry," she said in a hesitant, nervous voice. She looked at Evie briefly and then back at me. "Do we know each other?" I noticed there were no rings on her left hand when I stood up. She was an inch or so shorter than me, of slight build, but with expressive breasts, and seemed even more nervous when I stood up. I can't help but get up when people speak to me. "I don't think so," I tried to smile to reassure her. "I would definitely remember someone so attractive if we had met before." "And you have no grudges against me?" "No, of course not. I just said I don't know you at all. I'm sure we've never even met before." My smile had disappeared by then. This evening was turning into a disaster. She smiled at my answer and extended her right hand. "My name is Janet. Nice to meet you," she said. "My name is Nigel. Nice to meet you." We shook hands, and then she said, "Thank you," and walked away. I watched as she continued towards the exit and walked out the door. I sat down again, puzzled. "That was strange," I remarked. "Do you know her?" "Yes," Evie said after a short pause. "She went through a major trauma last year and has been in therapy ever since, and I was hoping you could help her. Plus, I thought she might help you in turn, or at least cheer you up a little." I looked at Evie. "Why do the women in your life always want to manipulate you, to use you for their own purposes, in this case to support some poor soul who has confidence issues? I used to be happy without having a woman in my life. Why can't they leave things as they are? Perhaps because they are curious, a realist would suggest, or because they are women, a cynic would say. I knew which camp I was in for a year now. What other surprises do you have in store for me during this dinner, Evie?" "Nothing during this dinner. Honestly, Nigel, I just want you to enjoy your meal and for us to have a nice conversation. I'm happy to chat about anything except my broken marriage or your sister and anyone in her, and therefore your family. Okay?" "Okay," Evie agreed. "So where do you live now, Nigel?" "I'm renting a one-room studio. I won't say where." "Is she comfortable, Nige?" "No, it's cold, damp, and very noisy here. It's not a very good area of the city, and there are always a lot of young people around. I have to bring my bike to the safety room. I could talk to Pat about lifting the financial restrictions of the separation, if you'd like." "No, the end is in sight. It's only another year or so, I think, until Junie finishes her master's. I assume Charlie got her degree since Pat's payments went down a couple hundred a couple of months ago." "Oh yeah, she graduated with honors. I went to Newcastle with Pat for graduation. It was wonderful," Evie said. "Charlie was really upset that you weren't there." "Yes, of course. Charlie scolded me rudely when I called her last year, and that ungrateful child said she never wanted to talk to me again," I said bitterly. "That's because she didn't know the whole story. Now she knows how she thinks. Charlie sent you email invitations but never received a response." "Pat seemed to easily forgive her for what she did if Pat was invited," I said. "Besides, I don't get emails anymore. I gave up my cell phone and left my laptop with Pat. Charlie stayed in Newcastle, got a local job, and says all her friends are there now." "Great. I wish her all the best. I'll pass it on when I see her." The waiter then came over with our entrees, taking a minute or two to set out our plates and bring me mustard and ketchup, as well as a steak knife. So we started eating. As soon as I began to eat, my appetite suddenly found me in the state of malnutrition I had been in for months, and I really got through the food quickly, even eating a side salad for the first time in a long time. Evie ordered more drinks, so I decided to grab a second beer. By the end of the main course, I was feeling quite mellow and decided to ask Evie how she was doing. Even when you're trying your best, a negative and grumpy attitude is hard to maintain after a couple of beers and a steak at someone else's expense. Maybe that's why some girls go along with it on the first date. "I'm fine, thanks," she smiled. "Still working in the same place, and nothing serious has happened in my life since the last divorce." Same old story, really. How are you doing? With romance? It's okay, I have trust issues natural, I guess, after a long relationship ended badly. There was a pause in the conversation. You didn't ask me about Pat's love life. Because I'm not interested, I answered truthfully, and we agreed not to talk about her. You're still suffering, aren't you? No, not really. Not because of the marriage per se. I think I accepted that it was probably over long before Muffins realized it. If we get divorced soon, I think I won't cry anymore because of this. Okay, I'm a little depressed about my living and working conditions, but on the other hand, I quite like being on my own and not having to worry about getting Pat's carpets dirty. I smiled, remembering those damned carpets. She didn't like what you did with those rugs. I interrupted her by laughing loudly. She steam cleaned them and still couldn't get all the stains out. She ended up having to replace the carpets in the hallway, stairs, and landing. Evie laughed too, remembering this. What color are they now? I asked. Dark gray, so spotted. I couldn't help myself. I had to take out a handkerchief again. My tears were flowing. Then my third beer arrived, and we ordered ice cream for dessert. Then followed coffee and cognac, it should be said, several cognacs. We continued to chat, but not about anything in particular, or nothing remained in my memory. I began to feel pleasantly intoxicated. Then she asked the $64,000 question. Would you like the evening to continue? I'd like you to come over to my house for dinner. Would you like to come? I hesitated. In fact, the evening went very well, and I started to enjoy it. I didn't go out for a whole year. I really missed company, especially female company. However, Evie was too close to home. I wanted to avoid all these complications. Sorry, Evie, I have to go home, work tomorrow. Plus, I don't want any complications in my life right now. Please, Nigel, I can't drive anyway because I've had too much to drink, so I need to call a taxi. Please come with me for at least an hour. We can have a cup of coffee, and then I'll arrange a lift for you home. No nonsense on my part, I promise. There's no point, Evie. Sure, you're a beautiful woman, but I treat you like a sister. We'll never be more than that. Wait here, she said. I'll just call for a car, and we'll talk about it when I get back. I twirled my fingers, waiting for her to leave. The waitress came over to clear away the coffee cups and glasses. I ordered a couple more cognacs and asked for the bill. Evie was still missing. I got the feeling that she ran away and left me to pay. Damn, I thought, this might be an inexpensive restaurant, but I'm sure the bill will be around £70, and I don't have that much cash on me. The cognacs and the bill arrived together. It was over £80. Hell, I might have to do their dishes for the next 2 weeks if Evie ran away. I'm definitely fed up with the Ballo family. I drank my cognac slowly, warmed it in my hand for quite a long time, swirling the glass, inhaling those heavenly vapors. Evie was still gone, so after I finished mine, I took her cognac and began to warm it in my hand as well. The waitress serving our table passed by several times, probably wondering why I was left alone and had not yet paid the bill. I was thinking the same thing and wondering how much time was left before closing. It felt like I sat there all alone for at least 20 minutes, and then finally Evie returned, to my relief, which must have shown on my face. "Missed you, dear?" she asked. I thought I'd have to do the dishes, and I left my favorite dishwashing gloves on the drying rack at home, I replied. Sorry, I was just sorting out my trip. You can still join if you change your mind, of course. No, I replied. Maybe another time when I'm feeling a little more social, say in a couple of years. The waitress brought out a card terminal and Evie paid the bill, to my relief. After the waitress made the sale and left, Evie smiled at me. Ready? Ready? I bent down and picked up my helmet. We walked out of the restaurant arm in arm. I thanked Evie for dinner and promised to return the favor when Junie finally finished her education and I was freed from financial obligations unless she decided to become a professor. When we got to the exit, I asked Evie when her car would arrive, and she said that they were already here and that she would just wait here while they drove around the parking lot. So I kissed her on the cheek goodbye, and she asked me not to lose touch with her. I reminded her where she could find me at work if she wanted to contact me. I rounded the corner to where the bike racks were. It was gloomy around, and in front of my bicycle stood two people, a man and a woman, well bundled up against the cold of the night. I did not look at them carefully as I was busy putting on my helmet and tying the strap, but as I passed by them, the woman addressed me. "Nige, can I speak?" she said. I froze. I hadn't heard that voice for exactly 12 months. I knew it. "Little sister called you and delayed me to give you enough time to get here?" "Yes, we waited at her house for you both to come to the diner, but you refused her offer. I really needed to talk to you, honey." I took off my helmet and looked into her face. "Don't call me dear," I said firmly through clenched teeth. "You lost that right a long time ago." I looked past her to see who was with her. It was dark, and he was wearing a baseball cap. It was not Nicholson, who was about my height and build. This guy was taller, thinner, about 6 feet. "Who are you, mate? Hats off, please." He took off his baseball cap, saying, "It's me, Dad, Robert. I'm here to help Mom talk to you." Is this the same Robert Daniel Billings who told me he wanted nothing more to do with me just a year ago? I said sarcastically, then turned to Pat. "Is he my son, Pat?" "Of course he's your son, you idiot," Pat snapped. "How could you doubt it? I don't know how long you've been dispensing your favors to your other lovers. I only caught you once." I threw it at her just as venomously. "Dad," Rob shouted. "Nigel," Pat sobbed at the same time. I continued, adding, "This is the reason why I never wanted to talk to you again, Pat, neither of you. It's too heartbreaking. You all want nothing to do with me, and I don't want anything to do with you either. Why the hell can't you all just leave me alone?" I screamed and at the same time started crying while trying to put on the helmet. I just wanted to get out of here. "Dad!" Robert shouted again and hugged me, pressing me to him. I tried to break free, but he pinned my arms to my body, and he was too strong, and I felt Pat hug me too. I stopped wasting time and energy on resistance and just burst into tears. I felt someone pull the helmet from my weakened hands and put it on the ground, and then Evie hugged me from behind too. Damn, I was surrounded on all sides, and all four of us were crying now. Families, even broken ones, still hurt, don't they? "Nige, you never caught me," Pat said through her tears. "It was Janet you caught in the shower." "What? Janet?" I sobbed. "What the hell is she?" Evie said, "You met her tonight. She asked you if you had a grudge against her." "Sorry, I'm really confused," I said. "Who the hell is she? And what does all this bullshit about being offended have to do with me?" Pat chimed in. "Janet was the sales manager where I work, and she had an affair with our old boss, Reggie Nicholson, for a couple of months. And while you were at work on Friday nights, I used to disappear into town with a couple of girlfriends and my sister while they were using our bedroom." "What? No, that's impossible. I know your BMW was in our driveway. Don't try to convince me I'm wrong." It was Janet's BMW. All three sales managers, Jeff, Janet, and I, had the same cars. I used to wait for a call from Janet that she was leaving so that I could get home after they left, and at least an hour before you would come home, giving me time to change the bed linen and put the dirty ones in the wash. Evie added her 2 cents. "Pat was with Paulin, Gemma, and I all evening until 11 p.m. She never drank while she was with us and said she was going to give you a memorable weekend from the moment you got home. Jem and Polly were so jealous of Pat because your marriage was the strongest we have ever known." Was, maybe, no, that's impossible. You were definitely in the shower room, Pat, until I tore up the bed, which allowed you to get out while I was downstairs working on the mattress. Then you snuck up on me in the garage and surprised me. I left immediately because. I said, trying to remember the night that I had been trying to forget for a whole year. When Pat snuck up behind me, I knew I had to leave. I had just destroyed her lover's car and trashed our bedroom. I was on the verge of strangling her. I didn't think I could hurt Pat, but at the time I was so upset and angry that I was in the middle of a red haze. Janet didn't make it out of the shower on her own. She was passed out and completely naked. You collected all her things along with mine. Her coat, purse, and car keys were still on the couch where she left them. As soon as I got home and I saw your car right behind Janet's BMW blocking her exit, I realized that we were all in trouble. I parked further down the street since there was no space left in our driveway, and besides, I wanted to leave a space for you so you could back out so Janet could go home. Then I saw the mattress on the lawn, the light on in the garage, and I realized that everything was much more serious than I thought. But if it was just a misunderstanding, why did everyone in my family tell me to leave? Well, Nige, it's my fault, said Pat. I couldn't tell the kids that you thought you caught me cheating. I thought if you could so easily think so badly of me, then maybe you were already thinking about cheating. I never. Now I know, honey, but you just destroyed our bedroom, my carpets, ruined every piece of clothing I owned, including my wedding dress. I really thought it was all over that night. It was. We were done. I knew from the first night we were together that this would all end in flames or tears one day. I was so far out of your league. Honey, No, I'm right about that. It would never work after the kids were gone. All this time you were moving up the corporate ladder, you were leaving me behind. Never. And you were much more experienced at sex than I was. That was obvious from our first date, and then you took the initiative our first time, so I knew you would leave me as soon as someone better came along. I was a virgin. What? I think it was a three-part chorus. I attacked you that first night because that same night I fell in love with you and wanted you to take my cherry right away. And when you didn't want to make love to me, I thought it was probably because you thought I was the innocent little girl I really was. So I lied. Did you lie? I lied. It was always just you. I never wanted to cheat with anyone. I'm not like Janet. I only ever wanted you. All that evening, I thought about making sweet love to you while Janet and Reggie snuck around and had disgusting, cheating sex in our bed. Knowing that I didn't have to look for romance, I already had the real thing at home. So if it hadn't been for that damn factory fire, I might have gotten lucky that night. And for the first time all weekend, there were no children at home, remember? Damn, I really screwed up by acting half-conscious, didn't I? You did it, but I wasn't much better then. I was truly angry at what you did. You destroyed the house, destroyed our bedroom, destroyed every seam of the clothes I owned. And Janet was scared, traumatized, and she hasn't been the same woman since then. We had to let her go from work. She couldn't work and couldn't cope with her divorce. Anyway, I had to call an ambulance after you left and stay there with her until then. She ended up in the hospital. The poor girl was in traumatic shock and needed sedatives. In fact, she still takes them. I couldn't stay home alone that night, so I called Evie. Evie intervened. Pat was a complete mess. Her nerves were on edge. She couldn't follow Janet's ambulance to the hospital. I had to pick her up, and then from the hospital, I took her back to mine. She stayed with me for over a week. This week has been a nightmare, Pat said. On Monday morning, Reggie came to work very late with a black eye. He was late because his wife needed to use the company car to take the children. Weekend at the hotel, apparently his wife had been suspicious of him for a long time, and you setting his car on fire was the last straw, so she hit him over the head with a lamp and kicked him out. Then, on Monday morning, Janet's husband came into the office and beat him to a pulp. Janet's husband went to the hospital with his mom early Saturday morning after finding a message from the hospital on his phone as he finished his night shift. His mom offered to go with him and take her clothes home to be washed. It was then that he found out that she was brought in only in a coat and nothing else. Evie continued the story. He put two and two together and confronted her. She admitted that she had an affair, but refused to say with whom. When her husband walked into the office Monday morning and saw Reggie's black eye and panic at seeing it reflected in the other eye, I think he broke 4 ribs. He broke. Then Evie and Pat started laughing. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy, I said. I thought I was going to get arrested for arson. No, laughed Pat. Reggie was sure that it was Janet's husband who burned his car, but no one admitted that they found out who did it. The funny thing is that Janet's husband was a fireman who was present at both your factory fire and Reggie's car fire. But there were many witnesses who saw me leave. However, no one liked that arrogant bastard enough to describe you to him or the police. Pat laughed. His neighbors were warming their hands by the fire and were a little annoyed when the firemen arrived and put out the flames. So why haven't you told me it was a mix-up until now? I didn't know anything about the Grafton fire for about a week, or about Reggie's car for that matter, Pat said. I was very angry with you and didn't want to talk to you, especially seeing how angry you were that night. The look in your eyes in the garage sent a shiver down my spine. I was truly afraid for my life. I thought you'd go home and sulk while I spent the week at Evie's. And Evie called us early the next morning and told us that you and your mom had a big fight, that you broke a few things, and that she was staying with Aunt Evie until you cooled down, Robert interjected. She was clearly terrified of the violence, and we all thought the worst, that you were going through a midlife crisis and needed time and space to cool off. I'm sorry about your wedding dress, Pat, I said. I didn't even notice anything in particular. I just grabbed everything and the hangers. I didn't even know you saved it. I got rid of my old wedding suit years ago. I took the dress out of the bags, but I didn't find it until about 10 days later. It was wrapped in plastic, but the oil seeped through and left stains. I can't even really clean it because it might just fall apart. Sorry. So, have you tidied the place up again? Yes, at least partially. The police treated it as a domestic incident and gave me a crime number. I talked to Jeannie, my friend at the insurance agency, and she filed it as a robbery. A nice insurance agent came and filed the cause of action as a robbery with aggravating circumstances, so they reimbursed me for the bedroom, carpets, and my clothes. The check arrived after about 2 or 3 months. Glad it worked out for you, I said. By this time, we had all loosened our grip, and I was able to pick up the helmet from the ground and fumble in my pocket for the key to the lock. Yeah, like I said, the appraiser came in about 10 days later, and the first time we went back to the house was that Tuesday. Pat continued, We came in after we thought you had to leave for work. I never intended to come back to live in that house with you, but I needed to be there for the appraiser to assess the damage. It was the first time I saw the destruction in the bedroom in daylight and the state you left the carpets in. I yelled down to Evie that it looked like you hadn't been there all week. And I screamed at her to come downstairs and look in the kitchen, Evie intervened. I saw a bouquet of wilted flowers, a bottle of wine, and a box of chocolates on the kitchen counter, Pat added, and I realized that you must have brought them to the 5th place, and my football friends Jonathan and Mark weren't giving out information either. Well, they're friends. I pulled the bike out of the rack and swung my right leg over the frame. Where are you going, Nige? Pat asked. Home, I answered. Okay, she said. The girls are waiting for you. They're dying to see you. It's not good. It's quite dangerous there. The car will be on bricks if they leave it in the parking lot for more than 10 minutes. No, they're home. I want you to come with me, Nige. I miss you. I don't think so, Pat. I'm used to being alone, I lied. You just said you weren't going to come back to the house until you were sure I was gone for good. That was before I saw the flowers and realized. And you started making the break official with a legal separation. But that was just to get you to talk to me, honey. Well, we're talking now. I put my foot on the pedal and drove down the path, looking over my shoulder. So you can continue with the divorce, honey. I'm ready to sign the papers any time. I rode off on my bike before they could say anything else. The next day, Pat unfrozen our assets. Even before I saw Evie at the copy shop for the first time, Pat already knew where I lived and worked. She hired a private investigator to track me down and just used Evie to start a conversation with me. So I wasn't surprised when I saw Pat waiting at the front door when I opened the copy shop at 8:30 a.m. that Friday. In fact, I opened 10 minutes early because it was raining, and we don't have a canopy like the old-fashioned stores. Apparently, she said the photocopier in her office was broken, and she needed to make a couple copies of an old report for some reason. Now that we're talking again, maybe we could meet one evening to talk if you're free, Pat suggested. I took the staples out of her report and smoothed out the pages. And what could we talk about one evening, for example? About how the kids are doing, what they want for Christmas, about Robert's wedding plans, about when we first fell in love, things like that. Perhaps there is something to talk about after all. When is Robert going to get married, and when did you fall in love with me? I asked, aligning the pages and feeding them into the document tray. 2 copies, Pat, right? Yeah, 2 will do, she answered, raising her voice to drown out the noise of the document scanner. Caroline prefers the last weekend in June, but she started looking for a suitable place too late. I pulled 2 copies from the tray, plus the original, and carried them to the counter. Well, first I need to decide on the dates and make a list of friends and family. My side of the family is pretty simple. Then I can save the date cards. I stapled the 2 copies together, just like the original, and took them to the counter. Of course, I said, putting the papers in the bag. Where and what time? Say, at the Charisma Lounge at 7 in the evening. She took the package. Maybe you were right. We worked well together for a while. How much do I owe you? 7 will be great. Yeah, I think we were a good team for a while. Without payment, I'm looking for a repeat order. I smiled. The customer entered the store by ringing the bell. I'll be with you in a minute, sir. I don't give in to persuasion easily. Pat tried to seduce me in her fancy Lexus sales executive's car with its perfectly working passenger door, but I resisted. I knew I could handle 3 weeks, but then she ambushed me on a dark gray landing after just 3 dates in the first 3 days, dishonestly using homemade lasagna followed by a dessert of sherry trifle with sprinkles. This damn woman can be irresistible when she wants to be. End. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.